Yeah. Okay, I'm going to start by giving you a quick overview of my company. We publish a weekly e-newsletter that Darren mentioned. We put on national events, have a consultancy that provides service to forest industry businesses. And we host and maintain one of the world's largest websites for the forest products industry. Our newsletter, some of you probably remember, used to be called Smallwood News, and we've recently renamed it Forest Business News. It goes out to about 10,000 readers every week, and we've been doing it for over 10 years now. The other part of our business is the events. We put on the Small Log Conference every other year, and we do that in teamwork with the Small Wood Conference that the Forest Service and Forest Products Society puts on. They put theirs on the even years, and we go on the odd years. We have it at the Coeur d'Alene Resort in beautiful downtown Coeur d'Alene, and the one coming up in 2013 will be our 6th one we've done so far. Our consultancy, we help businesses with financial and marketing plans, business plans, feasibility studies. We publish white papers. We help with grant writing, product development, public relations, and marketing assistance. Our website, like I said, it's a really large centralized database that really has a lot of information about the forest products industry. Last few years, of course, with biomass being such a hot topic, we've had a lot of there. Here in the near future, we're currently rebuilding our website and actually going to have a new look to our newsletter here in the near future. And we're going to have a free classified section. It's going to be kind of like the Craigslist, this Craigslist, for the forest products industry. And anyway, the website, we also we really keep track of the breaking news that's happening, the articles like Mike pointed out in the Salt Lake Tribune, all over the United States, all over the world, wherever we think that might be good information for you all that are out there doing the great work you do. We have a blog. Okay, now for my presentation on the history of biomass in the West. I'm going to give you a little different type of presentation. It's not academic or generated from library or internet research. It will span a period of time from the late 60s when my family moved to Missoula, Montana through today, and conclude with some thoughts on what woody biomass in the West might look like going forward. This presentation will be from my perspective and recollection and how I've seen woody biomass generated from sawmills and in-wood operations play out in the Rocky Mountain West over the past 40 plus years. Since I only have 25 minutes, including Q&A, my presentation would be from our pretty high level view, about the 30,000 foot level. My father spent his whole career in the forest products industry, as did my grandfather. When I was a senior in high school, my family moved to Missoula, where my father made a financial investment in and took the reins as general manager of a large family-owned forest products business that had 5 mills in the state, and they all had teepee burners. In the early 70s, I followed my father's and grandfather's footsteps and started my career in the forest products industry, and my first real job was as a sawmill manager in Roundup, Montana. And I've made my living ever since in various aspects of the forest products industry. Some that know me say I've sawdust my blood, but by today's terminology, maybe that's biomass. I think sawdust sounds better. Okay, check out this photo. That's how I remember Missoula air quality in 1969 when I was a senior in high school. There were so many sawmills, teepee burners in the Missoula Valley belching out smoke 24/7 that you couldn't see across town on a bad air day. At times there was so much ash in the air you couldn't tell whether it was snowflakes or ash landed on your head. Maybe that's a bit of an exaggeration, but you get the point. Air was really dirty. There were literally hundreds of teepee burners in the Rocky Mountain West during that era. And teepee burners were a costly and necessary evil of a sawmill operation. And leading up to the late 60s, there hadn't been much for markets for the mill's byproducts, like sawdust, bark, trim ends, or slabs generated through the process of making lumber for houses. So all those byproducts were burned in teepee burners. They had no emission controls and were also a fire hazard. More than one sawmill or neighboring structure burned down from fires that started from sparks flying out of the teepee burner. Some of the mills had boilers that could burn some of their byproducts in order to produce steam to heat their buildings in the winter and to provide thermal energy for their dry kilns and other production processes. However, those mills still produced way more byproducts than they could burn in their own boilers. Okay, so we hit the kind of the end of the era of teepee burners. In the late 50s and early 60s, along came pulp and paper mills that needed some of the mill's byproducts as feedstocks for their operation in the form of clean and screened wood chips. The pulp mill was also a market for the sawmill's bark that the sawmill needed for their boiler fuel. This created a market for about 60% of the byproducts generated at the sawmill and opened the door for citizens and lawmakers to call on a ban on teepee burners, which, to our benefit, they were successful. So I started my career in the 70s as a sawmill manager. The industry was challenged with what to do with the rest of the byproducts that pulp mills didn't buy, and that they were prohibited from burning in devices like their teepee burners that didn't have any emission controls. From the early 70s through 2000, forest products companies, marketers, entrepreneurs, innovators, and equipment manufacturers came up with all kinds of new products and businesses that could use mill byproducts. Came up with things like engineered wood products such as particle board, OSB, MDF, wood pellets for residential heating, landscape materials, fuel for wood-fired electrical generation plants. Basically, through a 30-year period from 1970 to 2000, virtually all mill byproducts could be sold into multiple markets and became a significant revenue source for the sawmills. However, beginning in the 80s and the following 20 years, the U.S. Forest Service began reducing their annual timber harvest, and we saw mill closures and industry consolidation. That changed the balance of mill products as sawmills in the West shifted from federal timberlands to private lands for their log supply. Now let's fast forward to 2000 through today. We had some really big game changers. Mike hit on most of them that I'm going to talk about here in a second. But we saw pulp and paper mills start to leave North America. Those same pulp and paper companies started to buy roundwood to replace the mill chips that were going away because of industry mill consolidation, and there were less sawmills. So we saw more of that through that period of time. Catastrophic wildfires, Mike talked about that, gave some really good insight. Mountain pine beetle epidemic. Federal Land Management Agency shift from commercial timber harvest to more forest restoration and fuels reduction activities. Europe's renewable energy mandates, they had an effect. I'll go into that in just a minute. Wars in the Middle East, believe it or not, they have an impact. Global economic downturn. And then we've had new markets for biomass through this last 10 or 11 years. So with that list of big game changers, what does that have to do with biomass? Well, before I go into that, remember the guy standing by the teepee burner I showed you earlier? And again, from my perspective, for almost every summer since 2000, the view from my deck overlooking the Missoula Valley has reminded me of those days in 1969 that I told you about earlier in the presentation. I took the photo on the right from my deck just last month. Only difference between the two photos is that the smoke and ash isn't coming from teepee burners anymore. It comes from large wildfires burning out of control near our town, neighboring states, and sometimes as far away as California, Alaska, and Canada. Missoula's air from forest fires was so bad at the end of this summer, school sporting events had to be moved to towns with cleaner air. That's not an exaggeration. That happened. All right, back to the really big game changers. Well, what I tried to do here is kind of group them all back up into three categories here: diminishing demand, less biomass markets, increased biomass availability, and new markets for biomass. When you look at the diminishing demand, as the pulp mills left, we had less places we could take that material. We had more mill closures. All those things kind of fit into that category. And then on the increased biomass supply side, with the federal land management agencies, like Mike said, started to take action and quit suppressing fires. Now we've got all these fires going on, and then we're trying to find these markets for it. So all those things I put on that list of the big game changers kind of fit into those categories. To sum it all up, and again from my perspective, a combination of all these big changers have created a situation in the Rocky Mountain West where there's more biomass being generated, as well as what could potentially be generated, than we have markets for. The global economic downturn and the U.S. debt crisis only added to the difficulty of finding funding for forest management and research and development for new biomass markets. Looking ahead, what's on the horizon? The USDA just last month announced that they're investing $126 million over the next 5 years to research the feasibility of converting non-food feedstocks like woody biomass into jet fuel. The two entities in the Northwest each got $40 million for this type of research. Do I think jet fuel can be made out of woody biomass at a profit? Well, someone would have told me 30 years ago that someday in the future we'll be going to conferences in Logan, Utah, where presenters will be using PowerPoint, having the audience text in their email address it on a cell phone in order to get a newsletter subscription, and that we're going to have all this taped and put up on a website in a few days. I'd have probably said, what the hell are PowerPoint, text messages, and cell phones? Yeah, I think really when I look at it, I think given those technology achievements we've seen, and plus all the computer and everything else, I really do think drop-in fuels like woody biomass converted into something to make aviation fuel, I do think that's in our future. I think we'll see many changes with woody biomass going forward. Hopefully those changes will restore our forests, create good paying jobs, clean up our air. Thanks for listening, and I hope you all enjoy the next couple of days, and I'd be glad to open it up to any questions or comments you might have.